Hi guys, this is chapter 4 of All Quiet on the Western Front, the first section. This is a pretty long chapter. In this chapter, we'll be focusing on contrast and the contrast of imagery, the contrast of ideas. And contrast really means two things that are opposite. So contrast between black and white, contrast between tall and short. Those are very simplistic ideas of what contrast is. In this case, we'll be combining two literary devices, a contrast of imagery, hopefully, and there'll be a little bit of personification inside of this chapter. Again, it's a long one, so the first half is pretty long, and the second half will be a little bit shorter, but this is chapter 4. And in the last chapter, we discussed some trench humor, some army justice. Some of the things you need to think about is how people punish people. And in fact, in this case, it's Himmelstas. Himmelstas got punished because he was mean. And the reason he was mean is because, in real life, he didn't have power. And when he got into the army, he had some power. So we want to keep thinking about central ideas, such as power and justice and what the author thinks of those things and how they're used, etc. Okay, chapter 4. We have to go up on wiring fatigue. That means they all have to go to the front and help people fix the wiring. The motor lorries are trucks in Britain, roll up after dark. We climb in. It is a warm evening and the twilight seems like a canopy under whose shelter we feel drawn together. That's a simile. Even the stingy Jaden gives me a cigarette and then a light. We stand jammed in together, shoulder to shoulder. There is no room to sit. But we do not expect that. Mueller is in a good mood for once. He's wearing his new boots. Don't forget where those boots came from. The engines drone, the lorries bump and rattle. The roads are worn and full of holes. We dare not show a light. So we lurch along and are often almost pitched out. That means thrown out of the truck. They're all standing up in the back of a truck, shoulder to shoulder. Again, these last few sentences were all about imagery. Some of them sound, some of them sensory images, how you touch or feel or taste something. There'll be a lot of that. Smell, touch, taste, feel, look for those things. That does not worry us, however. It can happen if it likes. A broken arm is better than a hole in the guts, and many a man would be thankful enough for such a chance of finding his home way again. Besides us stream the munitions columns. That means a whole bunch of men who are walking in order, carrying all of the weaponry and the ammunition. Besides us stream the munitions columns in long files. They are making the pace. That means they're walking in time. They overtake us continually. That means they go faster than us. We joke with them, and they answer back. A wall becomes visible. It belongs to a house which lies on the side of the road. I suddenly prick up my ears. Am I deceived? Again, I hear distinctly the cackle of geese. A glance at Kaczynski, a glance from him to me. We understand one another. That means they can go eat the geese. Geese are a delicacy and a good food out there. So Kaczynski, who's always resourceful, is looking to get some geese. Cat, I hear some aspirants for the frying pan over there. There's a vocabulary word for you. He nods. It will be attended to when we come back. I have their number. Of course, Cat has their number. He knows all about every leg of goose within a radius of 15 miles. The lorries arrive at the artillery lines. The gun emplacements are camouflaged with bushes against aerial observation so that the planes can't see them, and look like a kind of military feast of the tabernacles. Look that one up. These branches might seem gay and cheerful were not cannon embowered there. So there's the first example of contrast. I'm not going to tell you every time, but cannons underneath bushes. Cannons shouldn't be in bushes. Bushes should be pretty, right? So to have man-made cannons, instruments of death, disguised in bushes, is incongruous. It's not normal to see. Um, so you want to look for those kinds of things that are contrast. The air becomes acrid. That means it's very, very bitter to the nose, to the smell, to the taste, to the throat. With the smoke of the guns and the fog, the fumes of powder taste bitter on the tongue. The roar of the guns makes our lorries stagger, and reverberation rolls raging away to the rear. Everything quakes. Our faces change imperceptibly. We are not indeed in the front line, but only in the reserves, yet in every face can be read, "This is the front. Now we are within its embrace." It is not fear. Men who have been up as often as we have become thick-skinned. Only the young recruits are agitated. So there's another contrast between the older recruits and the younger recruits. Cat explains to them, "That was a 12-inch. You can tell by the report. Now you'll hear the burst." So he can hear, he's so used to being at the front, he can hear even what kind of weapons are being used, even if they're far away, only if he hears it. But the muffled thud of the burst does not reach us. It is swallowed up in the general murmur of the front. Does the front speak? The front doesn't speak. It's just the front line of people. So to describe it as murmuring, which is talking under your voice, to describe it as murmuring makes it personification. I hear the burst. So the cat listens. There'll be a bombardment tonight. We all listen. The front is restless. Another example. The Tommies are firing already, says Crop. The shelling can be heard distinctly. It is the English batteries to the right of our section. They are beginning an hour too soon. According to us, they start punctually at 10 o'clock. What's got them? Said Mueller. Their clocks must be fast. There'll be a bombardment, I tell you. I can feel it in my bones. Cat shrugs his shoulders. 3 guns open fire close behind us. The burst of flame shoots across the fog. The guns roar and boom. We shiver and are glad to think that we shall be back in the huts early in the morning. Our faces are neither paler nor more flushed than usual. They are not more tense nor more flabby. And yet, they are changed. We feel that in our blood a contact has shot home. There is no figure of speech. That is no figure of speech. That is a fact. It is a fact. It is the front, the consciousness of the front personification, that makes this contact. The moment that the first shells whistle over and the air is rent with the explosions, there is suddenly in our veins, in our hands, in our eyes, a tense waiting, a watching, a heightening alertness, a strange sharpening of the senses. The body, with one bound, is in full readiness. It often seems to me as though it were the vibrating, shuddering air that with a noiseless leap springs upon us, or as though the front itself emitted an electric current which awakened unknown nerve centers. Every time it is the same. We start out for the front, plain soldiers, either cheerful or gloomy. Then come the first gun emplacements, and every word of our speech has a new ring. When Cat stands in front of the hut and says, "There'll be a bombardment," that is merely his own opinion. But if he says it here, then the sentence has the sharpness of a bayonet in the moonlight. It cuts clean through the thought. It thrusts nearer and speaks to this unknown thing that is awakened in us, a dark meaning. There'll be a bombardment. Perhaps it is our inner and most secret life that shivers and falls on guard. So already we see symptoms of how the soldiers have changed from being young kids a few months ago to being hardened soldiers, older than they were, thinking of things like death and being prepared for bad things to happen. To me, the front is a mysterious whirlpool metaphor. Though I am in still water far away from its center, I feel the whirl of the vortex sucking me slowly, irresistibly, inescapably into itself. From the earth, from the air, sustaining forces pour into us. mostly from the earth. To no man does the earth mean so much as to the soldier. When he presses himself down upon her, long and powerfully, when he buries his face and his limbs deep in her from the fear of death by shellfire, then she is his only friend, his brother, his mother. He stifles his terror, and his cries in her silence and her security. She shelters him and releases him for 10 seconds to live, to run, 10 seconds of life, receives him again and often forever. Earth, earth, earth. Earth has become a woman, personification, that when they're under attack, they hug the ground, the earth, the very earth. And this is an example of contrast as well. Think about how that might be true. Earth with thy folds and hollows and holes into which a man may fling himself and crouch down in the spasm of terror under the hailing of annihilation, in the bellowing death of the explosions. O earth, thou grantest us the great resisting surge of new won life. Our being, almost utterly carried away by the flurry of the storm, streams back through our hands from thee, and we, thy redeemed ones, bury ourselves in thee, and through the long minutes, in a mute agony of hope, bite into thee with our lips. Interesting that they started using language that sounds very biblical here. So to combine the earth with a biblical idea, which is two different things. Things of the earth are not of the Bible. God and the earth are two different things, although God has created the earth according to the Christian Bible. So that they're combining these two things or contrasting them is very, very interesting for the author. At the sound of the first droning of the shells, we rush back in one part of our being 1,000 years. By the animal instinct that is awakened in us, we are led and protected. It is not conscious. It is far quicker, much more sure, less fallible than our consciousness. One cannot explain it. A man is walking along without thought or heed. Suddenly he throws himself down on the ground, and a storm of fragments flies harmlessly over him. Yet he cannot remember either to have heard the shell coming or to have thought of flinging himself down. But had he not abandoned himself to the impulse, he would now be a heap of mangled flesh. It is this second sight in us, that has thrown us to the ground and saved us, without our knowing how. If it were not so, there would not be one man alive from Flanders to Vosges. I don't know how to pronounce that. So the war is so terrible that any intellect of human nature is gone. Only the animal instinct to survive. It's fight or flight. So they're not even aware of the fact that they hit the ground to save themselves. They don't think about it. They just do it. It's an animal instinct all the way back to caveman days. We march up, moody or good-tempered soldiers. We reach the zone where the front begins and become on the instant human animals. So once they get back to where they are, they're human again. An indignant-looking wood receives us. Woods can't be, trees and woods can't be people. So again, we have personification. We pass by the soup kitchens. Under cover of the wood, we climb out. The lorries turn back. They are to collect us again in the morning before dawn. Mist and the smoke of guns lie breast high over the fields. The moon is shining. Along the road, troops file. Their helmets gleam softly in the moonlight. The heads and the rifles stand out above the white mist, nodding heads, rocking barrels. They're kind of like ghosts. Farther on, the mist ends. Here the heads become figures. Coats, trousers, and boots appear out of the mist as from a milky pool, simile. They become a column. The column marches on, straight ahead. The figures resolve themselves into a block. Individuals are no longer recognizable. The dark wedge presses onward, fantastically topped by the heads and the weapons floating on the milky pool metaphor. A column, not men at all. So again, another example of one having lost humanity. Guns and munition wagons are moving along a crossroad. The backs of the horses shine in the moonlight. Their movements are beautiful. That's kind of incongruous. It's ironic, right? They toss their heads and their eyes gleam. The guns and the wagons float past the dim background of the moonlit landscape. The riders in their steel helmets resemble knights of a forgotten time. It is strangely beautiful and arresting. We push on to the pioneer dump. Some of us load our shoulders with pointed and twisted iron stakes. Others thrust smooth iron rods through rolls of wire and go off with them. The burdens are awkward and heavy. The ground becomes more broken. From ahead come warnings. Look out! Deep shell hole on the left. Mind trenches. In other words, it's dark out, so there are holes all over the place left over from war, and people are telling them to be careful not to trip in the holes. Our eyes peer out. Our feet and our sticks feel in front of us before they take the weight of the body. Suddenly the line halts. I bump my face against the roll of wire carried by the man in front and curse. There are some shell-smashed lorries, trucks, in the road. Another order. Cigarettes and pipes out. We are near the line. In the meantime, it has become pitch dark. We skirt a small wood and then have the front line immediately before us. An uncertain red glow spreads across the skyline from one end to the other. It is in the perpetual movement, punctuated with bursts of flame from the nozzles of the batteries. That means the guns that are up close. Balls of light rise up high above it, silver and red spheres, which explode and rain down in showers of red, white, and green stars. See, this is how fireworks come to be. It's from the front. Many people who are soldiers don't like fireworks because it reminds them of war. But notice how the author is describing them beautifully. This is imagery. Red, white, and green stars. French rockets go up, which unfold a silk parachute to the air and drift slowly down. They light up everything as bright as day. Their light shines on us, and we see our shadows sharply outlined on the ground. They hover for the space of a minute before they burn out. Immediately, fresh ones shoot up in the sky, and again green, red, and blue stars. Bombardment, says Kat. The thunder of the guns swells to a single heavy roar and then breaks up again into separate explosions. The dry bursts of the machine guns rattle. Above us, the air teems with invisible swift movement, with howls, pipings, and hisses. They are smaller shells. And amongst them, booming through the night like an organ, simile, go to the great coal boxes and the heavies. They have a hoarse, distant bellow like a rutting stag. A stag is a male deer. And when they say he's rutting, that means he's looking to find a female. So he's making these sounds, these big sounds. And of course, the heavies, which are military shells, bomb shells, are not making. They're not actually deer, male deer. So there again, we have a simile. A rutting stag, and make their way high above the howl and whistle of the smaller shells. It reminds me of flocks of wild geese when I hear them. Last autumn, the wild geese flew day after day across the path of the shells. That's an interesting contrast. Geese going across these bombs that are flying through the air. The searchlights begin to sweep the dark sky. They slide along it like gigantic tapering rulers. One of them pauses and quivers a little. Immediately a second is beside him. A black insect is caught between them and tries to escape. The airman. He hesitates, is blinded, and falls. I think we need to make this chapter into 3 sections. So the airman was just described as a fly. So there's another metaphor. The imagery is stark in this chapter. And the chapter is very, very long. So let's pause for a moment. Think about the contrast that we found, the different types of imagery that we found, the ways that they connect to what the author is trying to say to us about humanity and war and what war does to people. And we'll start again with part 2 of chapter 4 in a few minutes.